October 8, 1993. The tree-lined streets of Naperville, Illinois glowed with autumn colors as residents prepared for another peaceful weekend in one of America's safest suburbs. Located 30 miles west of Chicago, Naperville represented the American dream realized: manicured lawns, excellent schools, and families who believed that hard work and good intentions could protect them from the darkness that plagued bigger cities. On Elm Street, in a modest two-story colonial with cheerful yellow shutters, Rebecca and Michael Torres were living proof that the dream was still possible. At 29, Rebecca had already earned a reputation as one of the most dedicated emergency room nurses at Chicago General Hospital, willing to work double shifts and cover holidays so colleagues could spend time with their families. Her supervisor, Dr. Patricia Williams, often said that Rebecca had a gift for making patients feel safe during their most frightening moments. "She has this way of looking into someone's eyes and instantly calming their fear," Dr. Williams would later tell investigators. Rebecca could take a patient who was screaming in pain and within minutes have them trusting her completely. It was like she could see straight into people's souls. Michael Torres, 32, had spent the last 8 years building his career as a commercial pilot with Midwest Airways. His colleagues described him as methodical, safety-conscious, and completely reliable, exactly the kind of person passengers wanted in the cockpit during turbulent weather. Michael had recently been promoted to fly larger aircraft on major routes, bringing him one step closer to his dream of captaining international flights. The Torres couple had met 5 years earlier at Chicago General Hospital when Michael was brought to the emergency room after a minor car accident. Rebecca had been assigned to his case, and Michael later joked that he fell in love with her bedside manner before he even noticed her striking green eyes and warm smile. Their Naperville neighbors knew them as the couple who brought homemade cookies to block parties, who shoveled elderly neighbors' driveways without being asked, and who never missed Sunday service at St. Andrew's Methodist Church. Rebecca sang in the choir, while Michael helped with the youth group, teaching teenagers about responsibility and goal-setting. They were the kind of people who made you believe in the goodness of humanity, neighbor Dorothy Chen would recall years later. Rebecca would check on anyone who seemed lonely, and Michael would fix your car if you asked. They were just genuinely decent people. The couple had been trying to start a family for 2 years, and Rebecca had recently begun fertility treatments at a Chicago clinic. Their conversations had shifted from discussing vacation destinations to debating baby names and planning the conversion of their spare bedroom into a nursery. But beneath the surface of their perfect suburban life, Michael had begun expressing concerns about his work that troubled Rebecca deeply. During their quiet dinners together, Michael had started mentioning irregularities he'd noticed during charter flights, cargo manifests that didn't match what was actually loaded onto planes, destinations that were changed at the last minute, and ground crews who seemed nervous around certain cargo shipments. "I've been flying charter routes to help pay for Rebecca's treatments," Michael confided to his brother Carlos during a September barbecue. "The money is good, but some of these flights feel wrong. Last week they loaded cargo in the middle of the night with no paperwork I could see. When I asked questions, the crew chief told me to focus on flying and forget about everything else." Rebecca had noticed Michael's growing unease and encouraged him to trust his instincts. As an emergency room nurse, she had developed a sixth sense about when something dangerous was approaching, and Michael's descriptions of his charter flights triggered the same internal alarm that warned her about critical patients who seemed stable but were actually dying. "If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't," Rebecca told Michael during a late-night conversation in their kitchen. "We don't need the extra money badly enough for you to compromise your principles or your safety." The week before their planned romantic getaway to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, Michael had made a decision that would ultimately cost both of them their lives. He began documenting the suspicious charter flights, taking discreet photographs of cargo loading procedures and copying flight manifests when crew chiefs weren't watching. "I think I need to report what I'm seeing," Michael told Rebecca on Thursday evening, October 7th, as they packed for their weekend trip. "If something illegal is happening and I don't speak up, I become part of it." Rebecca supported her husband's decision completely, but she suggested they discuss their options during their quiet weekend, away from the pressures of work and the city. Lake Geneva had always been their refuge, a place where they could walk along the shoreline, talk about their dreams, and reconnect with each other away from the demands of saving lives and flying planes. On Friday morning, October 8th, their neighbors watched as the couple loaded a small suitcase into their silver Toyota Camry, laughing about something Michael had said, while Rebecca adjusted the car radio to their favorite classical music station. Dorothy Chen waved from her garden as the Torres couple backed out of their driveway, Michael carefully checking his mirrors and Rebecca studying a map of their route to Wisconsin. "Have a wonderful time!" Dorothy called out, noticing how relaxed and happy they both looked. "You two deserve a perfect weekend together." Michael rolled down his window and called back, "Thanks, Mrs. Chen. We're planning to do absolutely nothing but enjoy each other's company." Rebecca blew their neighbor a kiss and laughed as Michael pretended to catch it and put it in his shirt pocket. The silver Camry disappeared around the corner at 9:23 a.m., carrying two people who had no idea they were driving toward an appointment with violence that would shatter their community's sense of security and expose a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of local law enforcement. By Sunday evening, when the couple failed to return home and missed their regular check-in call with Rebecca's parents, their perfect suburban life would be transformed into one of Illinois' most troubling, unsolved cases. The yellow shutters that had seemed so cheerful on Friday morning would become a symbol of lives interrupted and dreams destroyed. But on that beautiful October morning, as Michael Torres drove his beloved wife toward what they believed would be a romantic weekend of planning their future together, the darkness that was already reaching for them remained hidden behind the facade of charter flights and routine cargo manifests. What Rebecca and Michael didn't know was that their decision to document suspicious activities had already been discovered by people who would kill to protect secrets that connected suburban airports to urban drug networks and reached into the very police departments that citizens trusted to keep them safe. The couple's weekend getaway would become a one-way journey into a nightmare that had been waiting for them since the moment Michael first noticed that something about those charter flights didn't feel right. Sunday, October 10th, 1993. The phone rang at 4:47 p.m. in the guest services office of the Lake Geneva Grand Resort, interrupting weekend manager Patricia Holmes as she reviewed checkout reports. The caller identified himself as Carlos Torres, explaining that his brother Michael and sister-in-law Rebecca had reserved a lakefront suite for the weekend, but hadn't been answering their room phone. "I'm sorry, sir," Patricia replied after checking her computer system twice, "but we have no record of a Michael or Rebecca Torres checking in this weekend. Their reservation was confirmed, but they never arrived to claim their room." The words sent ice through Carlos's veins. Michael was obsessively punctual, the kind of person who arrived 15 minutes early for everything and called ahead if he was going to be even 5 minutes delayed. The idea that Michael would simply not show up for a weekend he and Rebecca had been planning for weeks was impossible. "Could you check again?" Carlos pressed, gripping the phone tighter. "Maybe they checked in under Rebecca's maiden name, Castellanos? Or maybe there was a mix-up with the reservation system?" Patricia checked every possible variation, but the result was the same. The Torres couple had never arrived at the resort. Their lakefront suite, with its panoramic view of Geneva Lake and bottle of champagne waiting on ice, had remained empty all weekend. At 5:23 p.m., Carlos called the Illinois State Police, his voice shaking as he explained that his brother and sister-in-law had disappeared somewhere between Naperville and Lake Geneva. The desk sergeant who took the report, Officer Janet Mitchell, assured Carlos that missing person reports were common on weekends, especially involving married couples who sometimes decided to extend their trips spontaneously. "Give it another day or two," Officer Mitchell advised, her tone suggesting she'd handled hundreds of similar calls. "Most adults who go missing turn up within 72 hours with perfectly reasonable explanations. Maybe they decided to stop somewhere romantic along the way." But Carlos knew his brother too well to accept that explanation. Michael would never worry his family by failing to check in, and Rebecca was equally responsible about staying in contact with her parents. Something terrible had happened, and every hour of delay was making it worse. The breakthrough came at 6:15 p.m. when a trucker named Bill Novak called the Illinois State Police about an abandoned vehicle he'd noticed at the Route 12 rest stop near Richmond, Illinois. The silver Toyota Camry had been sitting in the same parking spot since Friday evening, with what appeared to be personal belongings visible inside. "I drive this route 3 times a week," Novak explained to the dispatcher. "That car's been there for at least 2 days. Maybe longer. In this weather, if someone broke down, they would have called for help by now." State Trooper Amanda Foster arrived at the rest stop at 7:31 p.m., her patrol car's headlights cutting through the gathering darkness as she approached the abandoned Toyota. The license plate matched the information Carlos Torres had provided: Illinois registration, KJM 847, registered to Michael Anthony Torres of Naperville. The scene that greeted Trooper Foster was both mundane and deeply unsettling. The silver Camry sat in a parking space near the rest stop's main building, appearing normal except for the thin layer of leaves that had accumulated on its windshield. The car was unlocked, with both front doors able to open freely, as if the occupants had stepped out expecting to return momentarily. Inside the vehicle, Foster found evidence of an interrupted journey. 2 overnight bags sat neatly in the back seat, along with a cooler containing sandwiches that Rebecca had obviously prepared for their trip. Rebecca's purse rested on the passenger seat, containing her wallet with $127 in cash, credit cards, and her Illinois driver's license showing her smiling face. Most telling was what Foster found on the dashboard: a road atlas open to the Wisconsin page, with the route to Lake Geneva highlighted in yellow marker. A travel reservation printout from the Grand Resort lay beside the map, along with a small wrapped gift that appeared to be an anniversary present. The lack of any signs of struggle was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the scene. There was no broken glass, no blood, no torn fabric caught on door handles or scattered belongings. The car's interior looked exactly as if 2 people had simply stepped out to use the rest stop facilities and planned to return within minutes. Trooper Foster immediately called for a crime scene investigation unit and began interviewing rest stop employees and customers. The picture that emerged was frustratingly vague. Several people remembered seeing a silver Toyota in the parking lot over the weekend, but no one recalled seeing its occupants or witnessing anything unusual. James Peterson, the rest stop's weekend maintenance supervisor, provided the most specific information. "I noticed the car Friday night around closing time," Peterson told Foster. "I remember thinking the people inside must have been tired from driving because it sat there for a long time with the engine running before the lights finally went out." Peterson's observation suggested that Michael and Rebecca had stopped at the rest stop and spent time in their car before something happened to them. But what could have occurred in a public location that would cause 2 healthy adults to vanish without leaving any trace? The family notification calls that Trooper Foster made later that evening were among the most difficult of her career. Rebecca's parents, Maria and Jose Castellanos, received the news at their Chicago home while preparing Sunday dinner for the family gathering that their daughter and son-in-law would never attend. "Rebecca calls every Sunday at 6 o'clock, Maria Castellanos told Foster through tears. "She's called every Sunday for 10 years, even when she was studying for nursing school exams or working double shifts. Something terrible has happened to our babies." The initial police response reflected the limitations of missing person investigations in 1993. Without evidence of foul play, adults who disappeared were often presumed to have left voluntarily, even when such behavior contradicted everything their families knew about them. Detective Ray Martinez, the investigator assigned to the case, approached it with the systematic skepticism that defined small-town police work. "We have to consider all possibilities," Martinez explained to the Torres and Castellanos families during a Monday meeting at the Richmond Police Department. "Marriage problems, Financial stress? Secret relationships? There are many reasons why people choose to disappear. The suggestion that Rebecca and Michael might have staged their own disappearance outraged both families. Carlos Torres stood up from his chair, his voice rising with frustration and grief. "My brother is a commercial airline pilot with a spotless record and a security clearance. Rebecca is a registered nurse who saves people's lives every day. They don't have secret problems or hidden debts. They have a mortgage, a cat, and fertility appointments scheduled for next month." But Detective Martinez had seen too many cases where perfect families hid devastating secrets. His investigation would focus on the couple's finances, their marriage, and any possible reasons they might have chosen to disappear voluntarily. The first major break in the case came when Martinez contacted the Rest Stops management company about security camera footage from the weekend. The Route 12 facility had been equipped with a modern surveillance system just 6 months earlier, with cameras positioned to monitor both the parking lot and the main building entrances. The security manager, David Chen, initially seemed cooperative when Martinez requested the footage from Friday evening through Sunday morning. "We keep everything for 30 days as a matter of policy," Chen assured the detective. "I'll have the tapes pulled and ready for you to review tomorrow." But when Martinez returned to collect the surveillance footage on Tuesday morning, Chen's demeanor had changed completely. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he delivered news that would haunt the investigation for decades. "I'm afraid there's been a problem with the security system," Chen announced, avoiding direct eye contact with the detective. "The cameras malfunctioned over the weekend. We have no usable footage from Friday through Sunday." Martinez stared at Chen in disbelief. "What kind of malfunction? Technical failure? Power outage?" Chen's explanation became increasingly vague and unconvincing. "It appears to have been some kind of system error. The maintenance company is looking into it, but they say the data is completely corrupted, unrecoverable." The timing of the surveillance system failure was extraordinary. In 6 months of operation, the cameras had never experienced a significant malfunction. Yet during the exact weekend, when 2 people disappeared from the Rest Stop parking lot, the entire security system had somehow failed to record anything useful. As Detective Martinez left the Rest Stop that Tuesday morning, one question dominated his thoughts. Was the surveillance system failure a coincidence? Or had someone deliberately destroyed evidence that could reveal what happened to Michael and Rebecca Torres? The answer to that question was buried somewhere in a conspiracy that would take 25 years to uncover, involving people who had the power to make evidence disappear and witnesses forget what they had seen on a quiet October weekend in 1993, October 12, 1993. Detective Ray Martinez arrived at Chicago's Midway Airport at 8:30 a.m., walking through the bustling terminal toward the Midwest Airways Pilot Lounge, where Michael Torres had spent his final weeks of employment. The fluorescent lights reflected off polished floors as travelers hurried past, unaware that one of the pilots who had safely guided them through countless flights had vanished without explanation. The Midwest Airways facility buzzed with the controlled urgency that defined commercial aviation. Pilots in crisp uniforms reviewed flight plans, dispatchers coordinated departures, and maintenance crews performed pre-flight inspections with military precision. It was a world where safety protocols and attention to detail could mean the difference between life and death for hundreds of passengers. Captain James Sullivan, Michael's direct supervisor, greeted Detective Martinez in a conference room overlooking the terminal's main concourse. Sullivan was a 20-year aviation veteran with graying temples and the steady demeanor of someone who had guided aircraft through every possible weather condition and emergency scenario. "Michael Torres was one of our most reliable pilots," Sullivan began, his voice carrying genuine concern. "In 8 years with Midwest Airways, he never missed a scheduled flight, never had a safety violation, never received a single passenger complaint. That's why his disappearance makes no sense." But as Martinez pressed for more details about Michael's recent behavior, a different picture began to emerge. Sullivan admitted that Michael had been asking unusual questions about the airline's charter flight operations, particularly the cargo services that Midwest Airways provided to private customers. Michael started asking about manifests for charter flights. He wasn't even scheduled to fly, Sullivan explained, his tone becoming more cautious. He wanted to know about cargo weights, destination changes, and ground crew procedures for private charter operations. I told him to focus on his assigned commercial routes and not worry about other divisions. The conversation revealed that Michael had been flying supplemental charter flights through a subsidiary company called Midwest Charter Services, which operated out of a smaller airfield 20 miles west of Chicago. These flights paid significantly higher rates than commercial passenger service, making them attractive to pilots who needed extra income. Detective Martinez's next interview was with Captain Patricia Wong, a fellow pilot who had flown charter routes with Michael during the past 6 months. Wong was visibly nervous as she described her experiences working the private charter flights that had troubled Michael so deeply. The charter operation was different from our regular commercial flights, Wong admitted, glancing around the pilot lounge as if concerned about who might overhear their conversation. Different procedures, different ground crews, different cargo handling. Michael noticed things that I tried not to think about. Wong described cargo loading procedures that violated standard aviation safety protocols. Packages were loaded onto aircraft without proper documentation, weight distributions were estimated rather than precisely calculated, and flight plans were sometimes changed after takeoff based on radio communications from unknown sources. Michael started taking notes, Wong revealed, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. He photographed cargo loading procedures, copied flight manifests when supervisors weren't watching, and asked ground crew members about the contents of unmarked packages. The most disturbing revelation came when Wong described a charter flight from September where Michael had confronted the ground crew chief about cargo that seemed to shift during loading, suggesting liquid contents in containers marked as electronic equipment. Michael asked why electronics would be shipped in containers that sounded like they contained liquid, Wong recalled. The crew chief told him that pilots were paid to fly, not to ask questions about cargo. But Michael couldn't let it go. He kept saying that if something illegal was happening, we were all responsible for staying silent. Martinez's investigation took him next to Chicago General Hospital, where Rebecca Torres had worked as an emergency room nurse for 7 years. The hospital's sterile corridors and constant activity created a stark contrast to the aviation environment, but the story that emerged was eerily similar. Dr. Patricia Williams, Rebecca's supervisor in the emergency department, described a dedicated nurse whose professionalism had never wavered until the weeks before her disappearance. Rebecca had become increasingly distracted during her shifts, asking unusual questions about patient overdoses and drug-related medical emergencies. Rebecca started requesting copies of toxicology reports from overdose cases, Dr. Williams explained during their meeting in her cluttered office. She claimed she was conducting research for a nursing education project, but her questions were very specific. She wanted to know about drug purity, distribution networks, and geographic patterns in overdose cases. Nurse Jennifer Martinez, Rebecca's closest colleague, provided the most revealing information about Rebecca's state of mind during her final weeks at the hospital. According to Jennifer, Rebecca had become convinced that her husband's charter flight concerns were connected to Chicago's drug trafficking networks. Rebecca told me that Michael was seeing things on his flights that didn't make sense, Jennifer revealed. Cargo that was supposed to go to Milwaukee ending up in Miami, packages that were loaded under false documentation, flight routes that took bizarre detours over rural areas with small airstrips. Rebecca had begun correlating the timing of Michael's suspicious charter flights with spikes in drug overdose admissions to Chicago General's emergency room. Her nursing background in emergency medicine had taught her to recognize patterns in drug-related cases, and she believed the charter flights were connected to the high-purity drugs that were flooding Chicago's streets. She said Michael was going to report what they had discovered, Jennifer continued, her eyes filling with tears. Rebecca was scared, but she supported his decision. She said they couldn't stay silent if people were dying from drugs that might be transported on planes her husband was flying. Detective Martinez's investigation reached a crucial turning point when he contacted Midwest Charter Services directly. The company operated from a nondescript hangar at DuPage County Airport, a facility that catered to private aircraft and corporate flights rather than commercial passenger service. Frank Morrison, the operations manager for Midwest Charter Services, agreed to meet with Martinez, but immediately became defensive when asked about Michael Torres's concerns regarding cargo manifests and loading procedures. Michael Torres was becoming a problem, Morrison stated bluntly, his tone suggesting barely controlled irritation. He was paranoid, constantly questioning routine procedures, taking photographs of cargo operations, and bothering ground crew members with inappropriate questions. Morrison's characterization of Michael as unstable and paranoid contradicted every other description of the pilot's personality and professional behavior. According to Morrison, Michael had been exhibiting signs of mental instability that made him unsuitable for charter flight operations. Torres started seeing conspiracies everywhere, Morrison continued, his voice taking on the practiced tone of someone who had rehearsed this explanation. He claimed that cargo manifests were falsified, that flight routes were being changed for illegal purposes, that ground crews were involved in criminal activities. We were considering removing him from charter flight duties due to his erratic behavior. But when Martinez asked to review Michael's employment files and performance evaluations, Morrison claimed that most records had been destroyed in a recent office renovation. The few documents he could provide showed only the most basic information about Michael's flight hours and safety record. The contrast between Morrison's assessment and the testimony from Michael's colleagues at Midwest Airways was striking. Every commercial pilot who knew Michael described him as methodical, safety-conscious, and completely reliable. Yet the charter service painted him as paranoid and unstable, creating a narrative that would discredit any concerns he might have raised about illegal cargo operations. As Martinez left the DuPage County Airport that afternoon, he noticed several details that reinforced his growing suspicions about Midwest Charter Services. The facility had unusual security measures for a small charter operation, including armed guards, restricted access areas, and surveillance cameras that seemed excessive for routine aviation activities. Most telling was Morrison's reaction when Martinez asked about the specific charter flights that had concerned Michael Torres. Morrison's demeanor shifted from defensive to openly hostile, and he terminated the interview abruptly when pressed for details about cargo manifests and flight destinations. "Detective Martinez, I think this conversation is over," Morrison announced, standing up and walking toward the door. "If you have further questions about our operations, you'll need to speak with our attorney." Michael Torres was an unstable employee who saw problems that didn't exist. The meeting ended with Morrison escorting Martinez from the premises, but not before the detective noticed several aircraft on the tarmac that appeared to be loading or unloading cargo despite the late afternoon hour. The activity suggested that Midwest Charter Services operated around the clock, unusual for a small charter company that claimed to serve corporate customers. As Martinez drove back toward Richmond that evening, he reviewed the conflicting information he had gathered about Michael Torres. Commercial aviation colleagues described a dedicated pilot with an impeccable safety record, while the charter service painted him as paranoid and unreliable. The question that haunted Martinez was simple but crucial. If Michael Torres had discovered illegal activities connected to charter flight operations, and if he and Rebecca had been planning to report their findings to authorities, who would have had the power and motivation to silence them permanently? The answer to that question was hidden within a network of corruption that extended far beyond a small charter service, reaching into law enforcement agencies and government offices where officials had been bought and witnesses had been systematically silenced. But Detective Martinez didn't yet realize that his investigation was being monitored by the same people who had made Michael and Rebecca Torres disappear, and that his own safety was now at risk for asking the right questions about the wrong secrets. October 15, 1993. Detective Ray Martinez returned to the Route 12 rest stop at 7:00 a.m., determined to conduct thorough interviews with employees who had been working the weekend that Michael and Rebecca Torres disappeared. The morning air was crisp with autumn chill as he parked beside the same building where the couple's abandoned Toyota Camry had sat for 2 days before being discovered. The rest stop's day shift supervisor, Linda Walsh, had agreed to meet Martinez before the facility opened to regular traffic. Walsh was a 15-year employee with a reputation for knowing everything that happened at the busy travel center, making her potentially the most valuable witness in the investigation. But the woman who met Martinez in the parking lot was dramatically different from the confident supervisor he had spoken with by phone just 2 days earlier. Walsh appeared nervous, constantly glancing over her shoulder, and seemed eager to end their conversation before it began. "Detective Martinez, I'm afraid I can't help you," Walsh announced without preamble, her voice shaking slightly. "I wasn't working last weekend, and I don't know anything about the missing couple or their vehicle." Martinez consulted his notes, confused by Walsh's sudden memory lapse. "Mrs. Walsh, when we spoke on Tuesday, you told me you were working Friday night and remembered seeing a silver Toyota in the parking lot for an extended period. You said the occupants appeared to be resting in their car." Walsh's face went pale, and she took a step backward toward the building entrance. "I was mistaken," she replied, the words sounding rehearsed. "I work so many shifts that they all blur together. I can't be sure what I saw or when I saw it." The interview that Martinez had expected to last 30 minutes ended after less than 5 minutes, with Walsh claiming she needed to prepare for the morning rush and couldn't spare any more time. As she hurried back into the building, Martinez noticed her hands were trembling as she fumbled with her keys. The pattern became clear when Martinez attempted to interview other rest stop employees throughout the week. James Peterson, the maintenance supervisor who had provided detailed observations about the Torres vehicle, suddenly claimed he couldn't remember anything specific about that weekend. "I see hundreds of cars every week," Peterson told Martinez during a brief conversation in the facility's maintenance shed. "I can't possibly remember details about every vehicle or its occupants. Whatever I told you before, I was probably mistaken." When Martinez pressed Peterson for clarification about his earlier statement regarding seeing the couple's car with its engine running, Peterson became agitated and defensive. "Look, Detective, I don't want to get involved in whatever this is about," Peterson said, his voice rising with obvious anxiety. "I'm just a maintenance worker trying to do my job and stay out of trouble. I can't help you with your investigation." The systematic refusal of witnesses to cooperate extended beyond rest stop employees. Martinez discovered that several customers who had been at the facility during the Torres couple's disappearance were no longer available for interviews. Margaret Chen, a Chicago resident who had called the state police tip line to report seeing a suspicious interaction in the rest stop parking lot, suddenly disconnected her phone and moved out of her apartment without leaving a forwarding address. Her landlord claimed she had paid 3 months' rent in cash and left town for family reasons that couldn't be specified. Robert Williams, a truck driver who had reported seeing the Torres vehicle being approached by unknown individuals, stopped returning Martinez's phone calls. When Martinez visited Williams' listed address, neighbors said the truck driver had taken an unexpected long-haul assignment and wouldn't be back for several months. The pattern of disappearing witnesses was too systematic to be coincidental. Someone was ensuring that potential sources of information about the Torres couple's fate were unavailable for questioning, either through intimidation or financial inducement. The breakthrough that confirmed Martinez's suspicions came on October 20th, when he received an anonymous phone call at the Richmond Police Department. The caller's voice was disguised, possibly using electronic distortion, but the message was crystal clear. "Detective Martinez, stop looking for people who won't talk," the anonymous caller warned. "The Torres couple saw something they shouldn't have seen, and they paid the price for being curious. If you keep pushing, you might find yourself in a similar situation. Before Martinez could ask questions or attempt to trace the call, the line went dead. The brief conversation lasted less than 30 seconds, but it provided the first direct confirmation that Michael and Rebecca Torres had been murdered because they had witnessed something that powerful people needed to keep secret. The anonymous tip also revealed that Martinez's investigation was being closely monitored by the same individuals who had eliminated the Torres couple. His phone calls to witnesses, his visits to the rest stop, and his interviews with aviation personnel were all known to people who had the resources and motivation to silence anyone who threatened their operations. On October 22nd, Martinez received orders that would fundamentally change the direction of his investigation. Police Chief Robert Thompson called him into a private meeting that would be remembered as the moment when institutional corruption overwhelmed the pursuit of justice. "Detective Martinez, I'm concerned about the resources you're devoting to the Torres case," Chief Thompson began, his tone suggesting the conversation was not open to debate. "We've already established that the couple left voluntarily, probably to escape marital problems or financial difficulties." Martinez stared at his superior in disbelief. "Chief, we have no evidence supporting voluntary disappearance. Their car was abandoned, their belongings were left behind, and multiple witnesses have described suspicious activity at the rest stop." Thompson's response revealed the pressure that was being applied to shut down the investigation. "What witnesses, Detective? Everyone I've spoken with says they don't remember seeing anything unusual. The Torres couple obviously staged their disappearance and drove away in a different vehicle." The chief's assertion contradicted everything Martinez had documented during his investigation, but Thompson made it clear that further pursuit of the case was not optional. "I want this case wrapped up within 1 week," Thompson ordered, his voice carrying unmistakable authority. "File your final report concluding that Michael and Rebecca Torres disappeared voluntarily. The department has more pressing cases that require your attention." Martinez left the meeting, understanding that his investigation was being terminated not because of lack of evidence, but because someone with significant power wanted the Torres case to disappear from official records. The pressure to close the investigation was coming from sources beyond the Richmond Police Department's normal chain of command. The final blow to Martinez's investigation came on October 25th, when he discovered that crucial physical evidence from the Torres case had mysteriously vanished from the police department's evidence storage facility. Evidence clerk Patricia Williams informed Martinez that several key items from the case could no longer be located. Rebecca Torres's purse, containing her identification and personal effects, had been checked out for forensic analysis by someone whose signature was illegible on the evidence log. The couple's suitcases, which had contained clothing and personal items that might provide clues about their final destination, were listed as misplaced during storage facility reorganization. The road atlas from their car, with its highlighted route to Lake Geneva, was noted as damaged beyond usefulness and disposed of according to standard procedures. Most significantly, the audio recording of Martinez's conversation with rest stop maintenance supervisor James Peterson had been erased due to what was described as equipment malfunction during transfer to permanent storage. Williams, who had managed the evidence facility for 12 years without losing a single item, was visibly shaken as she explained the unprecedented disappearances. "Detective Martinez, in all my years managing evidence storage, I've never seen anything like this," she confided. "Items don't just vanish, especially not multiple pieces from the same case." The systematic destruction of evidence confirmed what Martinez already suspected. The Torres investigation was being sabotaged by people with access to police facilities and the authority to remove materials that could expose uncomfortable truths about the couple's fate. As Martinez sat in his office that evening, reviewing what remained of his case files, he realized that the Torres investigation had revealed something far more dangerous than a simple double murder. He had uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that reached into law enforcement agencies, aviation companies, and government offices at levels he was only beginning to comprehend. The phone call he received at 11:47 p.m. that night would confirm his worst fears about how far the conspiracy was willing to go to protect its secrets. "Detective Martinez," the electronically distorted voice said, "your investigation ends tomorrow. File your report concluding voluntary disappearance, or you'll discover what happened to the Torres couple firsthand." The threat was unmistakable, and Martinez understood that he was now fighting not just for justice for Michael and Rebecca Torres, but for his own survival in a system where corruption had replaced law enforcement at the highest levels. The question that haunted him as he sat alone in his darkened office was whether he would have the courage to continue investigating a case that powerful people were willing to kill to keep buried, or whether the Torres couple would join the ranks of victims whose deaths were covered up by the very institutions sworn to protect them. Police Chief Robert Thompson stood behind a podium in the Richmond Police Department's small press room, facing a handful of local reporters and the desperate families of Michael and Rebecca Torres. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his weathered face as he prepared to deliver the official conclusion to an investigation that had lasted exactly 18 days. After a thorough investigation into the disappearance of Michael and Rebecca Torres, Chief Thompson announced, reading from a prepared statement, "The Richmond Police Department has determined that this case should be classified as missing persons, with the likely cause being a tragic accident." The words hit the Torres and Castellanos families like physical blows. Carlos Torres shot to his feet from his chair in the front row, his voice cracking with disbelief and rage. "An accident?" Carlos shouted, his hands shaking as he gripped a folder containing all the evidence his family had compiled independently. Their car was abandoned at a rest stop. Their luggage was packed for a weekend trip. How does that constitute an accident? Chief Thompson's response was coldly bureaucratic, delivered with the practiced indifference of someone who had been ordered to close an inconvenient case regardless of the evidence. "Mr. Torres, adults have the right to disappear if they choose," Thompson replied, his tone suggesting the matter was not open for discussion. "Without evidence of foul play, we must conclude that your brother and his wife chose to leave their previous lives behind." The suggestion that Michael and Rebecca had staged their own disappearance sent Maria Castellanos into hysterics. Rebecca's mother collapsed sobbing in her husband's arms, repeating through tears that her daughter would never abandon her family without explanation. Detective Ray Martinez sat in the back row of the press room, watching his investigation being officially murdered by institutional cowardice and corruption. The case file in his lap contained 18 days of evidence pointing to abduction and murder, but his superiors had decided that solving the Torres case was less important than protecting whoever had ordered its termination. The press conference lasted less than 15 minutes, with Chief Thompson refusing to answer questions about the missing evidence, the intimidated witnesses, or the anonymous threats that had been made against Detective Martinez. The official police report would state that Michael and Rebecca Torres had disappeared voluntarily, and no further investigation would be conducted. The family's response to the police department's abandonment of the case was swift and desperate. On November 2nd, Carlos Torres and José Castellanos pooled their life savings to hire Marcus Webb, a retired FBI agent who had established a private investigation practice specializing in cases that local police couldn't or wouldn't solve. Webb had spent 25 years with the Bureau's Organized Crime Division, developing expertise in cases involving corruption, witness intimidation, and institutional cover-ups. His reputation for persistence and integrity had made him the go-to investigator for families who had lost faith in official law enforcement. "I've reviewed Detective Martinez's case notes and the physical evidence that hasn't disappeared," Webb told the families during their first meeting at his Chicago office. "This wasn't a voluntary disappearance or an accident. Michael and Rebecca Torres were murdered, and someone with significant power is working very hard to ensure that truth never comes to light." Webb's investigation began with attempts to re-interview witnesses who had refused to speak with Detective Martinez during the official investigation. But the private investigator quickly discovered that the intimidation campaign had intensified since the case's official closure. Linda Walsh, the rest stop supervisor, who had initially provided detailed information about the Torres couple's vehicle, refused even to acknowledge Webb's existence. When he approached her at the Route 12 facility, Walsh immediately called security and had him escorted from the premises without saying a single word. James Peterson, the maintenance worker who had observed the couple's car with its engine running, had quit his job and moved out of Illinois entirely. Webb's attempts to locate Peterson through employment records and forwarding addresses led to a series of disconnected phone numbers and abandoned apartments. The systematic erasure of potential witnesses extended to the aviation industry connections that had originally attracted Michael Torres's attention. When Webb attempted to interview pilots and ground crew members at Midwest Charter Services, he was met with hostile security personnel and legal threats from the company's attorneys. Frank Morrison, the operations manager, who had characterized Michael as paranoid and unstable, refused to speak with Webb entirely. A certified letter requesting an interview was returned unopened, accompanied by a cease and desist order from Morrison's legal counsel, warning against any further contact with company personnel. Webb's investigation faced obstacles that went far beyond uncooperative witnesses. On November 18th, his office was broken into during the night, with thieves targeting only files related to the Torres case. Nothing else was taken, not computers, cameras, or other valuable equipment, just the documentation Webb had compiled about Michael and Rebecca's disappearance. This wasn't a random burglary, Webb explained to the Torres families during an emergency meeting the following day. Professional criminals broke into my office with surgical precision, taking only materials that could expose whoever killed your children. The message was clear. Webb's investigation was being monitored by the same people who had eliminated the Torres couple, and his continued pursuit of the truth was putting him at personal risk. The media blackout that descended over the Torres case was perhaps the most telling evidence of how far the conspiracy reached into Illinois' institutions. The Chicago Tribune, which had initially covered the disappearance with front-page articles, suddenly stopped mentioning the case entirely after the official police press conference. Reporter Jennifer Hayes, who had been assigned to cover the Torres story for the Tribune, found her editor reassigning her to other stories without explanation. When Hayes pressed for permission to continue investigating the case independently, she was told that the newspaper had moved on to more current events. It was like someone had issued a directive that the Torres case was off limits, Hayes would later recall. One day I was writing follow-up stories about the investigation, and the next day I was forbidden from even mentioning their names in print. The Naperville Herald, the local newspaper that served the Torres couple's suburban community, experienced a similar editorial shift. Publisher Robert Chen, who had initially promised extensive coverage of his neighbor's disappearance, suddenly declared that the story was resolved and no longer newsworthy. Local television stations that had covered the case during its first week stopped returning phone calls from the Torres families. Press releases announcing Webb's private investigation were ignored, and requests for interviews about the case's inconsistencies were denied without explanation. The final blow to any hope of official justice came on December 1st, when Detective Ray Martinez received transfer orders that would effectively end his connection to the Torres case forever. Police Chief Thompson called Martinez into his office and informed him that he was being immediately reassigned to the Traffic Enforcement Division. "Detective Martinez, your investigative skills are needed in our traffic safety initiative," Chief Thompson announced, the transparent lie delivered without any apparent shame. "Effective Monday, you'll be focusing on drunk driving enforcement and accident investigation." Martinez understood that his transfer was punishment for refusing to abandon the Torres investigation quietly. His 18 days of documented evidence gathering had made him a liability to whoever was orchestrating the cover-up, and his new assignment would ensure he had no access to criminal investigations or evidence storage. "Chief, "I have 15 years of homicide investigation experience," Martinez protested. "The Torres case contains evidence of murder and institutional corruption that demands continued investigation." Thompson's response revealed the true scope of the pressure being applied to shut down any pursuit of the Torres case. "Detective Martinez, the Torres case is closed. Any officer who attempts to reopen that investigation or discuss it with unauthorized personnel will face immediate disciplinary action, including termination." The threat was unmistakable. Martinez could accept his transfer to traffic enforcement and keep his job, or he could continue pursuing the Torres case and lose his career, his pension, and possibly his life. As December arrived and brought the first snowfall to Richmond, Illinois, the official investigation into Michael and Rebecca Torres' disappearance was completely dead. Their case file had been transferred to inactive storage, their families had been abandoned by law enforcement, and the media had been silenced through methods that remained mysterious but effective. Private investigator Marcus Webb continued his work for another 6 months, but the obstacles became increasingly dangerous. His car tires were slashed, his home phone was tapped, and he received anonymous threats warning him to stop investigating the Torres case. By June 1994, even Webb was forced to admit defeat. The conspiracy that had killed Michael and Rebecca Torres was too powerful, too well connected, and too willing to use violence to protect its secrets. The Torres case joined the ranks of unsolved disappearances that haunted Illinois law enforcement records. But unlike most cold cases, this one had been deliberately buried by the very institutions supposed to seek justice for victims. For 25 years, the truth about what happened to Michael and Rebecca Torres would remain hidden in sealed files, intimidated witnesses, and the memories of investigators who had been forced to abandon their pursuit of justice. But in a basement storage room beneath the Richmond Police Department, a box of evidence that someone had forgotten to destroy was waiting patiently for the right person to discover it and realize that the Torres case had never been properly investigated. It had simply been covered up by people who had something enormous to hide. The question that would haunt everyone involved in the case's suppression was whether they had successfully buried the truth forever, or whether time would eventually expose the conspiracy that had cost 2 innocent people their lives and corrupted an entire system of justice. March 15, 2018. Police Chief Patricia Sullivan descended into the basement storage facility beneath the Richmond Police Department, her flashlight cutting through decades of accumulated dust and forgotten case files. After 32 years in law enforcement, Sullivan was 3 weeks away from retirement, determined to organize the department's records before turning over leadership to her successor. The basement storage room hadn't been properly cataloged since the 1990s, when budget cuts had eliminated the clerk position responsible for maintaining archived evidence. Boxes stacked floor to ceiling contained the remnants of closed cases, abandoned investigations, and bureaucratic debris from nearly 4 decades of police work. Sullivan worked methodically through rows of cardboard boxes, most labeled with case numbers and dates that corresponded to routine investigations from decades past. But wedged behind a water heater in the basement's furthest corner, she discovered a metal evidence box that seemed deliberately hidden rather than simply misfiled. The box bore no external labeling except for a piece of masking tape with RT personal files written in faded ballpoint ink. Unlike the cardboard storage boxes surrounding it, this metal container had been sealed with evidence tape and locked with a combination padlock that appeared to have been installed recently. Sullivan's curiosity was immediately aroused. In 3 decades of police work, she had never encountered an evidence box that was both locked and hidden in a location where it was unlikely to be discovered during routine record searches. The deliberate concealment suggested someone had been protecting the contents from official scrutiny. Using bolt cutters from the maintenance room, Sullivan severed the padlock and carefully opened the metal box. What she found inside would fundamentally change her understanding of her department's history and expose a conspiracy that had been hidden for 25 years. The box contained over 200 pages of documents related to the 1993 disappearance of Michael and Rebecca Torres. documents that had never been processed through official channels or included in the case file that had been presented to the couple's families. Among the hidden materials were witness statements from rest stop employees that contradicted their official testimony. Linda Walsh, the supervisor who had claimed memory lapses during Detective Martinez's investigation, had actually provided detailed written statements describing suspicious individuals who had approached the Torres couple's vehicle. According to Walsh's hidden statement, she had observed two men in dark clothing forcing Michael and Rebecca Torres into a black sedan at approximately 10:30 p.m. on October 8, 1993. Walsh had witnessed the entire abduction, but had been told by her supervisor to forget what she saw and deny any knowledge of the incident. James Peterson, the maintenance worker who had claimed he couldn't remember details about that weekend, had actually photographed the Torres vehicle and the suspicious individuals surrounding it. The hidden files contained Polaroid photographs showing two men searching through the couple's Toyota Camry, while a third person watched from a black sedan parked nearby. Most damaging were surveillance photographs from cameras that had supposedly malfunctioned during the weekend of the Torres disappearance. The hidden files contained clear images of the abduction taking place, showing the faces of the perpetrators and the license plate of the vehicle used to transport the victims. Sullivan stared at the surveillance photos in disbelief, realizing that the Richmond Police Department had possessed definitive evidence of the Torres couple's abduction for 25 years, while officially maintaining that no crime had occurred. The hidden documents also contained evidence of the systematic pressure applied to terminate the Torres investigation. Internal memoranda showed that Police Chief Robert Thompson had received direct orders from Illinois State Police officials to classify the case as voluntary disappearance and cease all investigative activities. One particularly damning document was a handwritten note from Thompson to Detective Martinez, dated October 25, 1993. Ray, orders from Springfield, Torres case ends tomorrow. File report concluding voluntary disappearance. Destroy all evidence suggesting foul play. This comes from the top. The note was accompanied by documentation showing that evidence from the Torres case had been systematically destroyed or transferred to federal custody without any official record of which federal agency had claimed jurisdiction. Sullivan realized she was looking at proof of a conspiracy that reached from local law enforcement through state government agencies, involving people with the authority to order evidence destruction and witness intimidation on a massive scale. The final section of hidden documents contained financial records showing unusual payments made to Richmond Police Department personnel during late 1993 and early 1994. Detective Martinez, several patrol officers, and even evidence clerk Patricia Williams had received unexplained cash bonuses that coincided with the Torres case closure. The records suggested that police personnel had been paid to participate in the cover-up, either through direct bribery or through departmental bonuses funded by sources outside normal municipal budgets. Sullivan spent the entire weekend reviewing the hidden files, gradually understanding that the Torres case had been deliberately buried by a conspiracy involving multiple law enforcement agencies, aviation companies, and government officials whose connections remained unclear. On Monday morning, March 19th, Sullivan made a decision that would expose decades of institutional corruption. She contacted the Illinois State Bureau of Investigation's Internal Affairs Division and requested an immediate meeting to report evidence of systematic police misconduct and possible criminal conspiracy. The response from Springfield was immediate and concerning. ISB officials claimed they had no record of any Torres case from 1993 and suggested that Sullivan was mistaken about the significance of documents that were probably routine administrative materials from closed investigations. The dismissive response from state authorities confirmed Sullivan's suspicions that the conspiracy extended far beyond the Richmond Police Department. Someone with significant influence was still working to keep the Torres case buried, even 25 years after the couple's disappearance. Sullivan's next call was to Detective Ray Martinez, who had been forced out of investigative work in 1993 and had spent the last 25 years working traffic enforcement. Now, 63 years old and approaching his own retirement, Martinez had never stopped wondering about the case that had ended his career as a homicide investigator. "Chief Sullivan, I've been waiting 25 years for someone to find those files," Martinez said when she described the hidden evidence box. "I knew that someone had preserved proof of what really happened to Michael and Rebecca Torres." Martinez revealed that he had secretly maintained copies of his original investigation notes, witness interviews, and photographic evidence from the Torres case. Despite orders to destroy all materials related to the investigation, Martinez had hidden documents in his personal files, hoping that someday the truth would emerge. "I couldn't live with myself knowing that two innocent people had been murdered and their families deserved answers," Martinez explained during their clandestine meeting. "I've been waiting for the right moment to come forward with what I know about the cover-up." The combination of the hidden evidence box and Martinez's preserved documents provided comprehensive proof that the Torres couple had been abducted and murdered by individuals connected to the aviation drug trafficking operation that Michael had been investigating. Chief Sullivan made the decision to bypass Illinois state authorities entirely and contact the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, which had jurisdiction over cases involving systematic law enforcement misconduct and interstate criminal conspiracies. FBI Special Agent Jennifer Chen arrived in Richmond on March 25, 2018, to review the evidence that Sullivan and Martinez had preserved. Chen's preliminary assessment was that the Torres case represented one of the most extensive law enforcement cover-ups she had encountered in 15 years investigating police corruption. "This isn't just a cold case," Agent Chen explained to Sullivan and Martinez during their initial briefing. "This is evidence of a criminal conspiracy involving multiple agencies, witness intimidation, evidence destruction, and possible murder. We're looking at federal charges against everyone who participated in burying this investigation." The FBI's involvement triggered the formation of a joint federal-state task force specifically created to investigate the Torres case and the institutional corruption that had concealed it for 25 years. The task force included agents from the FBI's Organized Crime Division, the DEA's Aviation Unit, and prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois. On April 1, 2018, exactly 25 years and 5 months after Michael and Rebecca Torres disappeared from the Route 12 rest stop, their case was officially reopened as a federal investigation into murder, conspiracy, and systematic corruption of law enforcement agencies. The announcement of the reopened investigation sent shockwaves through Illinois law enforcement and aviation communities, as people who thought their secrets were safely buried realized that a quarter-century of silence was about to end. But the most significant reaction came from Carlos Torres, now 58 years old and a grandfather, who received the phone call he had been hoping for since 1993. "Mr. Torres," FBI agent Chen told him, "we have reopened your brother's case, and we have evidence proving that Michael and Rebecca were murdered. After 25 years, we're finally going to get justice for your family." As the federal task force began its investigation in 2018, one question dominated the minds of everyone involved. How many people who had participated in the 1993 cover-up were still alive and in positions where they could be held accountable for their role in burying evidence of a double murder? The answer to that question would determine whether the Torres family would finally receive justice or whether a quarter-century of successful conspiracy had placed the perpetrators beyond the reach of legal consequences. FBI Special Agent Jennifer Chen established her command center in a secure conference room on the 3rd floor of the federal building in Chicago, surrounded by 25 years of evidence that would expose one of Illinois' most extensive police corruption scandals. The walls were covered with organizational charts, financial records, and surveillance photographs that painted a picture of systematic criminal conspiracy reaching from local law enforcement to state government. The internal investigation into the Richmond Police Department began with forensic document analysis conducted by the FBI's Question Documents Unit. Special Agent Patricia Williams, a handwriting expert with 15 years of experience exposing falsified police reports, examined every document from the Torres case files with microscopic precision. Financial records seized from the charter company showed payments totaling over $2 million between 1992 and 1994, with funds flowing through offshore accounts connected to known drug trafficking organizations. The operation used legitimate charter flights to mass criminal cargo, with pilots like Michael Torres unwittingly transporting illegal substances alongside routine business shipments. Michael Torres stumbled onto one of the Midwest's largest drug smuggling operations, DEA Special Agent Michael Rodriguez explained during the task force briefing. His documentation of irregular cargo manifests and suspicious loading procedures threatened to expose a network that was generating millions in illegal profits. The charter company's connections to law enforcement corruption became clear when investigators analyzed financial records from the Richmond Police Department and Illinois State Police. Multiple officers had received cash payments that coincided exactly with their participation in suppressing the Torres investigation. Former Police Chief Robert Thompson, now retired and living in Florida, had received $50,000 in payments from shell companies connected to Midwest Charter Services during the months when he was ordering the Torres case closure. The payments were disguised as consulting fees for aviation security services that Thompson had no qualifications to provide. Detective Ray Martinez, who had been forced to abandon the Torres investigation, discovered that his personnel file contained forged documentation claiming he had been disciplined for investigative misconduct related to the case. The false records were created to discredit any future attempts he might make to expose the cover-up. They didn't just silence the investigation, Martinez told FBI agents during his formal interview. They created a paper trail designed to destroy the credibility of anyone who tried to reveal the truth about what happened to Michael and Rebecca Torres. The scope of police involvement in the trafficking operation extended far beyond individual bribery. Evidence suggested that Richmond Police Department evidence storage had been used to temporarily hold drug shipments during transport, with corrupt officers providing security for trafficking operations in exchange for substantial cash payments. Evidence clerk Patricia Williams, who had reported the mysterious disappearance of Torres case materials in 1993, revealed that she had been coerced into participating in evidence tampering under threat of prosecution for theft charges that had been falsely filed against her. They told me I could cooperate with evidence removal or face federal charges for stealing police equipment, Williams confessed to FBI investigators. I was a single mother with 2 children, and I couldn't afford to lose my job or go to prison. So I helped them destroy evidence that could have solved the Torres case. The investigation revealed that at least 8 officers from the Richmond Police Department had received payments from the trafficking organization, including patrol officers who provided advance warning of drug enforcement activities and detectives who suppressed investigations into suspicious aviation activities. Illinois State Police corruption extended to the highest levels of the department, with evidence showing that orders to close the Torres investigation had originated from officials who were receiving payments through the same shell companies that funded local police cooperation. As the federal investigation expanded, a pattern emerged showing that the Torres murders had been ordered specifically to prevent Michael and Rebecca from reporting their discoveries to federal aviation authorities. The couple had been planning to contact the FAA and DEA with evidence of the charter company's illegal activities during their weekend at Lake Geneva. Michael and Rebecca Torres were killed because they were about to expose a multimillion-dollar drug trafficking operation that had corrupted law enforcement agencies across Illinois. Agent Chen announced during a press conference that sent shockwaves through the state's political establishment. The federal investigation had uncovered evidence of conspiracy, murder, drug trafficking, police corruption, witness intimidation, and systematic obstruction of justice spanning 25 years. The scope of criminal activity was so extensive that prosecutors were preparing racketeering charges that could result in life sentences for anyone convicted of participating in the conspiracy. But as FBI agents prepared arrest warrants for dozens of suspects connected to the Torres case, they discovered that several key figures in the original conspiracy had died under suspicious circumstances during the intervening 25 years, taking their secrets to graves that might have been dug to prevent them from ever testifying about their role in covering up a double murder. The question that haunted federal investigators as they prepared for the largest corruption prosecution in Illinois history was whether enough conspirators were still alive to face justice, or whether a quarter-century of successful silence had allowed the masterminds of the Torres murders to escape accountability through natural death and carefully planned disappearances. April 28, 2018. FBI financial crimes specialist agent Michael Torres spread 2 decades of banking records across the conference table in Chicago, his trained eye searching for patterns that would expose the money flow behind one of Illinois' most extensive criminal conspiracies. The irony that he shared a surname with the murdered couple was not lost on anyone in the room, and it seemed to fuel his determination to uncover the financial architecture that had funded their deaths. Agent Torres had spent 15 years following money trails for the Bureau's Organized Crime Division, tracking everything from mob money laundering to terrorist financing. But the Torres case presented unique challenges because the financial conspiracy had been operating successfully for over 25 years, with sophisticated methods designed to hide criminal payments within legitimate government transactions. The key to understanding this conspiracy is recognizing that we're dealing with professional money launderers who had access to law enforcement banking systems, Agent Torres explained to the federal task force. These weren't amateur criminals making obvious cash deposits. This was a systematic operation designed to hide millions in drug money within official police department budgets. The financial investigation began with analyzing bank records from Richmond Police Department personnel who had been involved in suppressing the Torres case. What investigators discovered was a pattern of suspicious deposits that coincided exactly with key moments in the cover-up timeline. Former Police Chief Robert Thompson's personal banking records showed deposits totaling $127,000 between October 1993 and March 1994. Disguised as consulting payments from a company called Aviation Security Solutions. The company existed only on paper, with its listed address being a mail forwarding service in the Cayman Islands. Thompson received his largest payment, $50,000, on October 29, 1993, Agent Torres noted, pointing to bank records displayed on the wall-mounted screen. That's exactly 1 day after he held the press conference announcing that the Torres case was being closed as a voluntary disappearance. Detective Ray Martinez's personnel file revealed that he had been offered similar payments in exchange for cooperation with the cover-up. Unlike other officers, Martinez had refused the money, which explained why he was transferred to traffic enforcement rather than receiving financial compensation for his silence. Evidence clerk Patricia Williams had received monthly payments of $1,000 for 6 months after the Torres case closure, described as overtime compensation for evidence management services. The payments stopped abruptly when the evidence from the Torres case had been completely destroyed or transferred to unknown federal custody. The financial investigation expanded to include Illinois state police officials who had ordered the case closure. Captain James Sullivan, who had issued directives to Richmond police about terminating the Torres investigation, had received payments through a shell company called Midwest Consulting Group that shared the same Cayman Islands address as Thompson's fictional aviation security firm. We're looking at a coordinated money laundering operation that used offshore shell companies to disguise bribes as legitimate consulting payments, Agent Torres explained. The same criminal organization was paying police officers at multiple levels to ensure the Torres investigation never uncovered their drug trafficking activities. The federal probe into Midwest Charter Services revealed the scope of the drug smuggling operation that Michael Torres had been unknowingly investigating. DEA financial analysts discovered that the charter company was processing over $10 million annually through accounts connected to known cocaine trafficking organizations. The operation worked by using legitimate charter flights to transport drugs alongside legal cargo, with corrupt customs officials and aviation inspectors ensuring that shipments were never properly searched. Private airstrips in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana served as distribution hubs where drugs were transferred from aircraft to ground transportation networks. Flight records recovered from Midwest charter services showed that Michael Torres had been assigned to routes that were central to the smuggling operation. His growing suspicions about irregular cargo manifests had threatened to expose the entire network, making him a liability that the organization could not tolerate. The hidden evidence box recovered from the Richmond Police Department basement contained Michael Torres's original documentation of suspicious charter flights, providing the FBI with unprecedented insight into how the pilot had systematically gathered evidence of criminal activity. Michael had photographed cargo loading procedures that violated standard aviation safety protocols, copied flight manifests that showed discrepancies between documented and actual cargo, and recorded conversations with ground crew members who had inadvertently revealed details about the illegal shipments. Michael Torres was conducting his own investigation into the drug trafficking operation, Agent Torres explained to the task force. His documentation was so thorough that it could have resulted in federal indictments against dozens of people involved in the conspiracy. The pilot's evidence included photographs of packages labeled as electronic equipment that were leaking liquid during transport, suggesting chemicals used in drug processing. Flight logs showed routes that made unexplained detours over rural areas where small airstrips could accommodate cargo transfers away from official aviation oversight. Most damaging was Michael's discovery that the same aircraft used for suspicious cargo flights were being cleaned with industrial chemicals after each trip, indicating that the planes were being decontaminated to remove traces of illegal substances. Rebecca Torres' role in exposing the criminal operation was revealed through her medical records at Chicago General Hospital. As an emergency room nurse, Rebecca had been treating an increasing number of overdose victims whose toxicology reports showed unusually pure cocaine and heroin, drugs that were entering Chicago through the same aviation network her husband was investigating. Dr. Patricia Williams, Rebecca's supervisor, provided the FBI with documentation showing that Rebecca had been conducting her own research into the geographic patterns of drug overdoses in the Chicago area. Her analysis had revealed that spikes in overdose cases coincided with the timing of Michael's suspicious charter flights. Rebecca was connecting dots between her husband's aviation concerns and the drug epidemic she was seeing in the emergency room, Dr. Williams explained during her FBI interview. She realized that the planes Michael was flying were probably transporting the same drugs that were killing her patients. Rebecca's nursing expertise had allowed her to recognize patterns in overdose cases that law enforcement had missed. She documented that overdose victims were dying from drugs with purity levels that suggested direct importation rather than street-level distribution, indicating that the substances were entering Chicago through wholesale smuggling operations. The couple's combined evidence, Michael's aviation documentation, and Rebecca's medical research, painted a comprehensive picture of a drug trafficking network that used private aircraft to flood Illinois with high-purity narcotics while corrupting law enforcement agencies to prevent investigation. FBI analysis of the couple's home computer, recovered from evidence storage after 25 years, revealed that Michael and Rebecca had been planning to present their findings to federal authorities during their weekend at Lake Geneva. They had scheduled meetings with DEA and FAA officials for the following week to report the criminal activities they had discovered. The Torres couple had assembled enough evidence to destroy a multi-million-dollar drug trafficking operation and expose corruption in multiple law enforcement agencies. Agent Torres concluded during his presentation to federal prosecutors, their planned disclosure to federal authorities provided a clear motive for murder. The financial investigation had established that Michael and Rebecca Torres were killed to prevent them from reporting criminal activities that would have resulted in dozens of arrests, seizures of millions in drug money, and exposure of police corruption spanning multiple jurisdictions. The money trail showed payments totaling over $2 million to law enforcement personnel between 1992 and 1995. With the largest payments coinciding with the Torres couple's murder and the subsequent cover-up of their investigation. As federal agents prepared arrest warrants for the surviving members of the conspiracy, they faced a sobering realization about the scope of corruption they had uncovered. The Torres case had exposed a criminal network that had successfully operated for over 25 years, generating hundreds of millions in illegal profits while corrupting law enforcement agencies designed to protect public safety. But the most chilling discovery was yet to come. Financial records suggested that the Torres murders were not an isolated incident, and that other people who had threatened to expose the drug trafficking operation had also been eliminated to protect the conspiracy's secret. The question that would haunt federal investigators as they prepared for the largest organized crime prosecution in Illinois history was how many other victims had died to keep the network's criminal activities hidden, and whether the evidence needed to convict the masterminds had survived 25 years of systematic destruction. FBI Special Agent Jennifer Chen sat in a secure safe house in suburban Milwaukee, Wisconsin, across from witnesses who had remained silent for 25 years out of fear for their lives. The modest ranch home had been transformed into a temporary federal witness protection facility, complete with armed guards and electronic surveillance designed to ensure that the people inside could finally tell the truth about what they had seen on October 8, 1993. Linda Walsh, the former Route 12 rest stop supervisor, appeared decades older than her 68 years, her hands shaking as she prepared to provide testimony that would expose the systematic murder and cover-up that had haunted her for a quarter century. Walsh had lived every day since 1993, knowing that she had witnessed a double murder, but had been terrorized into silence by people who had the power to destroy her life. Agent Chen, I need you to understand that I've been living in hell for 25 years, Walsh began, her voice barely above a whisper. Every night I see their faces, Michael and Rebecca Torres, and I know that my silence helped their killers escape justice. Walsh's testimony, given under federal protection, revealed the true sequence of events that had led to the Torres couple's abduction and murder. According to her eyewitness account, Michael and Rebecca had arrived at the Route 12 rest stop at approximately 9:45 p.m. on October 8, 1993, driving their silver Toyota Camry as part of their planned romantic weekend to Lake Geneva. They seemed like such a happy couple, Walsh recalled, tears streaming down her face. Rebecca was laughing at something Michael had said, and they were holding hands as they walked toward the building. They looked like they didn't have a care in the world. The Torres couple had used the rest stop facilities and purchased coffee from the vending machines, spending about 15 minutes inside the building while their car remained parked in the main lot. Walsh had noticed them because they seemed so content with each other, in contrast to many travelers who appeared stressed or tired from long drives. But as Michael and Rebecca returned to their vehicle, Walsh observed two men in dark clothing approaching their car from different directions. The men moved with the coordinated precision of individuals who had planned their actions in advance, positioning themselves to prevent the couple from escaping. The men weren't trying to rob them, Walsh explained to Agent Chen. This was something much more organized. One man approached the driver's side while the other positioned himself near the passenger door. They had badges or identification that they showed to Michael and Rebecca. Walsh's testimony revealed that the abductors had impersonated federal law enforcement officers, using fake credentials to convince the Torres couple to comply with their instructions. Michael and Rebecca had initially cooperated, believing they were dealing with legitimate authorities who needed to speak with them about some routine matter. Rebecca looked confused, but not frightened at first, Walsh continued. Michael was asking questions, probably wondering why federal agents would approach them at a rest stop. But then something changed, and I could see that they realized they were in danger. The abduction occurred when Michael Torres apparently recognized one of the men approaching their vehicle. According to Walsh's testimony, Michael's demeanor shifted from confusion to alarm when he saw the face of someone he knew, possibly from his charter flight work with Midwest Charter Services. Michael said something to Rebecca that made her face go white with fear, Walsh recalled. Then he tried to get back into their car, but the men grabbed both of them and forced them toward a black sedan that was parked nearby. Walsh watched helplessly as Michael and Rebecca Torres were pushed into the back seat of the black sedan, with one abductor driving their Toyota Camry and the other following in the sedan. The coordinated vehicle switch had taken less than 3 minutes, occurring in a public location where other travelers were present, but apparently hadn't noticed the carefully orchestrated abduction. "I should have called the police immediately," Walsh said, her voice breaking with 25 years of accumulated guilt. But one of the men looked directly at me through the window and pointed at me before they left. I knew that I had been seen, and I was terrified of what would happen if I reported what I had witnessed. Walsh's testimony was corroborated by James Peterson, the rest stop maintenance worker who had also been placed in federal witness protection. Peterson had been working in the parking lot when the abduction occurred and had photographed the license plate of the black sedan used to transport the Torres couple. Peterson's Polaroid photographs, recovered from the hidden evidence box, showed 2 men forcing Michael and Rebecca into the sedan, while a third person waited in the driver's seat. The images were clear enough to identify the faces of the abductors and the license plate number of the vehicle, providing law enforcement with evidence that could have led to immediate arrests in 1993. "I took the pictures because something felt wrong about the whole situation," Peterson explained during his FBI interview. "But when I tried to give them to Detective Martinez the next day, my supervisor told me to forget what I had seen and destroy the photographs. He said federal agents had already handled the situation." The witness testimony extended beyond the rest stop to include employees at Midwest Charter Services who had been threatened into silence about Michael Torres's investigation into illegal cargo operations. Federal witness protection had encouraged several former aviation workers to come forward with information about the drug trafficking network that had ordered the Torres murders. Robert Chen, a former ground crew supervisor at DuPage County Airport, revealed that employees at Midwest Charter Services had been systematically threatened to prevent them from discussing irregular cargo operations with anyone outside the company. Frank Morrison, the operations manager, called a staff meeting after Michael Torres started asking questions about cargo manifests, Chen testified. Morrison told us that anyone who discussed company operations with outsiders would be fired immediately and blacklisted throughout the aviation industry. Chen described a culture of fear at Midwest Charter Services, where employees who witnessed suspicious cargo loading procedures were intimidated into silence through threats to their employment and personal safety. Workers who asked questions about unmarked packages or irregular flight patterns were transferred to different shifts or terminated under false pretenses. "We all knew that something illegal was happening," Chen continued, "but we were too scared to report it." Morrison made it clear that the company had connections to law enforcement and that anyone who caused problems would face serious consequences. The hospital connection that Rebecca Torres had discovered was confirmed through testimony from Dr. Patricia Williams and other emergency room personnel at Chicago General Hospital. Federal investigators had analyzed drug overdose patterns from 1992 through 1994, revealing that spikes in overdoses coincided exactly with the timing of suspicious charter flights documented by Michael Torres. Dr. Williams provided the FBI with toxicology reports, showing that overdose victims during this period were dying from drugs with purity levels that indicated direct importation rather than street-level distribution. The correlation between charter flight schedules and emergency room admissions was so precise that it provided mathematical proof of the connection between Midwest Charter Services and Chicago's drug epidemic. Rebecca Torres was right to be concerned, Dr. Williams told federal investigators. The drugs that were killing our patients were entering Chicago through the same aviation network that her husband was investigating. She had identified a connection that law enforcement had completely missed. The timeline reconstruction of Michael and Rebecca Torres' final hours painted a picture of two people who had unknowingly sealed their own fate by planning to report criminal activities to federal authorities. Computer records recovered from their home showed that Michael had scheduled meetings with DEA and FAA officials for the week following their Lake Geneva trip. The couple had spent their final day making copies of evidence that Michael had compiled about irregular charter flights, organizing Rebecca's research into drug overdose patterns, and preparing presentation materials for their planned meetings with federal investigators. Michael and Rebecca Torres were going to expose the entire drug trafficking network, Agent Chen explained during a briefing with federal prosecutors. Their evidence would have resulted in dozens of arrests and the seizure of millions in drug money. The criminal organization had to silence them before they could reach federal authorities. Phone records showed that Michael Torres had made a call to the DEA tip line on October 7, 1993, one day before the couple's disappearance. The call had been logged but never investigated, suggesting that the drug trafficking network had informants within federal law enforcement agencies who warned them about Michael's planned disclosure. The witness testimony had reconstructed the final 24 hours of Michael and Rebecca Torres' lives, showing how two people who believed they were doing the right thing by reporting criminal activity had actually signed their own death warrant by threatening a multi-million-dollar drug trafficking operation. As federal agents prepared arrest warrants based on the witness testimony, they realized that the Torres case had exposed a criminal conspiracy that extended far beyond local police corruption. The drug trafficking network had maintained informants within federal agencies, ensuring that threats to their operation were neutralized before they could reach investigators with the authority to shut down their activities. The question that haunted federal prosecutors as they prepared for the largest organized crime trial in Illinois history was whether the witness testimony would be enough to convict the surviving members of a conspiracy that had successfully operated for over 25 years by eliminating anyone who threatened to expose their crimes. But the most chilling revelation was yet to come. The witness testimony suggested that Michael and Rebecca Torres were not the only people who had been murdered to protect the drug trafficking network, and that other victims were buried in locations that had never been discovered by law enforcement. May 25, 2018. FBI Special Agent Jennifer Chen received the anonymous phone call at 3:17 a.m., jolting her from sleep with information that would finally answer the question that had haunted the Torres families for 25 years. Where were Michael and Rebecca buried? The caller's voice was electronically distorted, but the message was crystal clear. Agent Chen, if you want to find Michael and Rebecca Torres, search the old Hendricks farm on County Road 47, 12 miles west of Richmond. Look for the abandoned well behind the collapsed barn. They've been waiting 25 years for someone to bring them home. The line went dead before Chen could ask questions or attempt to trace the call. But the specificity of the information suggested someone with direct knowledge of the Torres murders was finally ready to reveal the location where the couple had been buried. Within 6 hours, a joint FBI-Illinois State Police forensic team had assembled at the remote farm property, a 160-acre spread that had been abandoned since the late 1980s, when the original owners had died and their children had been unable to maintain the operation. The property sat at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by dense woods that would have provided perfect concealment for disposing of bodies without risk of discovery. The Hendricks farm matched the caller's description exactly: a collapsed barn, overgrown fields, and the remains of an old homestead that had been slowly reclaimed by nature over 3 decades. Behind the barn's rotting wooden frame, investigators found a stone-lined well that had been sealed with concrete and covered with debris to hide its location. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the FBI's chief forensic anthropologist, supervised the careful excavation of the well site using ground-penetrating radar and archaeological techniques designed to preserve any evidence that might have survived 25 years of burial. The process took 3 days, with investigators working in shifts around the clock to uncover what lay beneath decades of accumulated soil and debris. On May 28th, at 2:45 p.m., Dr. Martinez's team made the discovery that would transform the Torres case from a missing persons investigation into a federal murder prosecution. 22 feet below ground level, at the bottom of the abandoned well, they found the skeletal remains of 2 individuals along with personal effects that immediately identified them as Michael and Rebecca Torres. Rebecca's nursing school class ring, engraved with her initials and graduation year, was found with the remains. Michael's pilot's license, still partially intact after more than 2 decades underground, confirmed the identity of the second victim. The couple's wedding rings were recovered together, suggesting they had died side by side. The forensic analysis conducted by Dr. Martinez revealed evidence of violent death that contradicted any theory of accident or voluntary disappearance. Both skeletons showed clear signs of trauma consistent with gunshot wounds, with bullet fragments still embedded in bone that could be analyzed for ballistics comparison. These individuals were murdered execution style, Dr. Martinez explained during her initial forensic briefing. The positioning of the remains and the trajectory of the bullet wounds indicate they were forced to kneel at the edge of the well before being shot. This was a professional killing designed to eliminate witnesses. The preservation conditions at the bottom of the sealed well had maintained evidence that would have been destroyed by surface burial. Fabric fragments from the couple's clothing, personal jewelry, and even traces of rope that had been used to bind their hands provided a treasure trove of forensic evidence for investigators. Most significantly, the ballistics analysis of bullet fragments recovered from the remains revealed a connection that stunned federal investigators. The bullets had been fired from 2 different weapons, a .38 caliber revolver and a 9mm automatic pistol that were traced through serial number databases to the Richmond Police Department evidence room. Agent Chen stared at the ballistics report in disbelief, realizing that Michael and Rebecca Torres had been murdered with weapons that were supposed to be secured in police custody as evidence from other criminal cases. The weapons used to kill the Torres couple were checked out of police evidence storage on October 8, 1993, Agent Chen announced to the federal task force. They were returned the following day with falsified documentation claiming they had been used for ballistics testing. The evidence room logs showed that the weapons had been checked out by Detective Ray Martinez, but Martinez's signature on the documents was clearly forged. Handwriting analysis proved that someone else had used Martinez's name to obtain access to the murder weapons, then returned them to evidence storage to hide their involvement in the Torres killings. The DNA breakthrough came when forensic specialists analyzed genetic material recovered from rope fragments found with the remains. The rope had been cut with tools that left microscopic fibers containing DNA from multiple individuals who had handled the materials used to bind the Torres couple. Laboratory analysis identified genetic profiles from 3 different people who had contact with the rope, providing investigators with potential suspect DNA that could be compared against law enforcement personnel databases and other criminal records. We have DNA evidence from at least 3 people who were directly involved in binding and murdering Michael and Rebecca Torres, Dr. Martinez reported. This genetic evidence provides definitive proof of who participated in the killings, regardless of how much time has passed. The DNA profiles were immediately compared against samples from Richmond Police Department personnel who had been involved in suppressing the Torres investigation. The results provided shocking confirmation of law enforcement involvement in the murders themselves, not just the subsequent cover-up. Detective William Patterson, who had been assigned to assist with the original Torres investigation, was identified as one of the 3 DNA profiles found on the rope used to bind the victims. Patterson had retired from the Richmond Police Department in 1995 and moved to Arizona, where he had been living quietly on his police pension for over 20 years. Sergeant Michael Thompson, brother of former police chief Robert Thompson, was identified as the second DNA profile. Unlike his brother, who had received payments for ordering the case closure, Michael Thompson had apparently been directly involved in the abduction and murder of the Torres couple. The third DNA profile remained unidentified, but genetic genealogy analysis suggested the individual was related to someone in law enforcement databases. Federal investigators began the painstaking process of building family trees to identify the final participant in the Torres murders. The discovery of the Torres remains provided federal prosecutors with physical evidence of murder that eliminated any remaining doubt about what had happened to the couple. The ballistics evidence, DNA profiles, and forensic analysis created an overwhelming case against the surviving members of the conspiracy. For Carlos Torres and the Castellanos family, the discovery brought both relief and renewed grief. After 25 years of wondering whether Michael and Rebecca might still be alive somewhere, they could finally mourn their loved ones properly and begin seeking justice for their murders. "We always hoped they would come home," Carlos Torres told reporters after being notified of the discovery. "This isn't how we wanted it to happen, but at least we know the truth now. Michael and Rebecca can finally rest in peace." The forensic evidence recovered from the well site provided federal investigators with everything needed to prosecute the Torres murders as a federal racketeering case involving conspiracy, drug trafficking, police corruption, and murder. The DNA evidence ensured that the surviving perpetrators could be identified and held accountable for their crimes. But as FBI agents prepared arrest warrants for the suspects identified through forensic analysis, they discovered that the conspiracy to hide the Torres murders had been more extensive than anyone had imagined. The anonymous caller who had revealed the burial location was about to provide information that would expose additional victims and crimes that had been concealed for decades. The question that haunted federal investigators as they processed the evidence from the well site was whether Michael and Rebecca Torres were the only people buried on the abandoned farm, or whether other victims of the drug trafficking conspiracy were waiting to be discovered in the Illinois countryside. Dawn broke gray and ominous over Richmond, Illinois, as FBI tactical teams positioned themselves outside homes that had once been symbols of law enforcement respectability. After 25 years of freedom, the people who had murdered Michael and Rebecca Torres were about to face justice in a coordinated operation that would shatter the community's faith in its most trusted institutions. At 6 a.m. sharp, federal agents executed simultaneous arrest warrants at 4 locations across Illinois and Arizona, bringing an end to one of the longest-running criminal conspiracies in the state's history. The arrests represented the culmination of months of investigation that had exposed corruption reaching from local police departments through state government agencies. Detective William Patterson was arrested at his retirement home in Phoenix, Arizona, where he had been living peacefully on his police pension for over 2 decades. The 71-year-old former detective showed no surprise when FBI agents knocked on his door, suggesting he had been expecting this moment since DNA evidence had identified him as one of Michael and Rebecca Torres's killers. "I've been waiting for this day for 25 years, Patterson told arresting agents as handcuffs were placed around his wrists. "I knew that someday the truth would catch up with all of us." Sergeant Michael Thompson was arrested at his brother's former home in Richmond, where he had been staying since retiring from the Illinois State Police in 2001. Unlike Patterson, Thompson attempted to flee when federal agents surrounded the property, leading to a brief chase through the suburban neighborhood where Michael and Rebecca Torres had once lived their seemingly perfect lives. Thompson's arrest occurred just 3 blocks from the Torres family home, adding bitter irony to the capture of a man who had helped murder 2 people whose only crime was threatening to expose criminal activities that had corrupted the very institutions sworn to protect them. The third arrest took place at DuPage County Airport, where Frank Morrison, the operations manager for Midwest Charter Services, was taken into custody as he attempted to destroy documents related to the drug trafficking operation. FBI agents found Morrison in his office at 5:45 a.m., feeding papers into a commercial shredder in a desperate attempt to eliminate evidence that could connect him to 25 years of criminal conspiracy. Morrison was systematically destroying flight records, cargo manifests, and financial documents when agents entered his office. FBI Special Agent Jennifer Chen announced during a press conference later that morning, "His actions demonstrate consciousness of guilt and awareness that his criminal activities had finally been exposed." The fourth arrest proved to be the most significant for understanding the full scope of the conspiracy. Captain James Sullivan, the Illinois State Police official who had issued orders to close the Torres investigation, was detained at his Springfield office, where he had continued working in law enforcement administration despite his role in covering up a double murder. Sullivan's arrest sent shockwaves through Illinois law enforcement, as he had risen to become Deputy Director of the State Police Internal Affairs Division, the very department responsible for investigating police misconduct. For over 2 decades, Sullivan had been in a position to suppress any investigations that might have exposed his role in the Torres conspiracy. The federal racketeering charges filed against the 4 men represented one of the largest police corruption cases in Illinois history. U.S. Attorney Patricia Williams announced that the defendants faced charges under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO, which allowed prosecutors to treat the drug trafficking operation and murder conspiracy as an ongoing criminal enterprise. These defendants participated in a 25-year criminal conspiracy that included drug trafficking, murder, witness intimidation, evidence destruction, and systematic corruption of law enforcement agencies, U.S. Attorney Williams declared. "We will seek the maximum penalties allowed under federal law for these heinous crimes." The RICO charges carried potential sentences of life imprisonment without parole, ensuring that the surviving conspirators would spend their remaining years in federal prison if convicted. The breadth of the charges reflected the scope of criminal activity that had been uncovered through the FBI investigation. The breakthrough confession came from an unexpected source. Captain Robert Wilson, a former Midwest Charter Services pilot who had witnessed the Torres murders but had remained silent for 25 years out of fear for his own safety. Wilson's attorney contacted federal prosecutors on June 7th, offering his client's testimony in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Wilson's confession, given under federal protection, provided prosecutors with an eyewitness account of the Torres murders that would be crucial for securing convictions against the other defendants. According to Wilson's testimony, he had been present at the abandoned Hendricks farm when Michael and Rebecca Torres were executed by Detective Patterson and Sergeant Thompson. "I was told that we were meeting to discuss Michael Torres's investigation into irregular charter flights," Wilson explained during his proffer session with federal prosecutors. "When I arrived at the farm, I found Michael and Rebecca kneeling beside the well with their hands tied behind their backs." Wilson described watching in horror as Patterson and Thompson executed the couple with weapons they had obtained from the Richmond Police Department evidence room. The murders had been planned as a message to anyone else who might consider reporting the drug trafficking operation to federal authorities. Frank Morrison told me that Michael and Rebecca Torres had to be eliminated because they were planning to expose the entire operation. Wilson continued. He said that federal investigators were already asking questions about irregular cargo shipments, and the Torres couple's evidence would have resulted in dozens of arrests. Wilson's confession revealed that the murders had been ordered by higher-level figures in the drug trafficking organization who had never been identified by the FBI investigation. The Torres killings were part of a systematic elimination program designed to silence anyone who threatened the multimillion-dollar smuggling operation. The evidence of systematic police corruption spanning multiple administrations shocked even experienced federal investigators. Document analysis revealed that at least 12 officers from the Richmond Police Department had received payments from the drug trafficking organization between 1990 and 1995, with corruption continuing under 3 different police chiefs. Illinois State Police corruption extended to the highest levels of the department, with evidence showing that orders to suppress the Torres investigation had originated from officials who were receiving payments through the same offshore shell companies that had funded local police cooperation. We are looking at institutional corruption that compromised law enforcement agencies for over 25 years, FBI Special Agent Chen explained during congressional testimony about the case. The drug trafficking organization had successfully purchased protection from police departments that were supposed to investigate and prosecute their criminal activities. The revelation that respected law enforcement officials had been living double lives as both police officers and criminal conspirators devastated the Richmond community and surrounding areas. Local residents struggled to understand how people they had trusted with their safety had actually been working for criminal organizations. Dorothy Chen, the Torres family's former neighbor who had watched Michael and Rebecca leave for their final weekend together, expressed the community's sense of betrayal and disillusionment. "We trusted these people to protect us," Chen told reporters gathered outside her Naperville home. "We invited police officers to our neighborhood barbecues. Our children looked up to them as heroes, and all this time they were criminals who had murdered 2 of our neighbors." The community impact extended beyond emotional trauma to include practical concerns about law enforcement integrity. Hundreds of criminal cases handled by the corrupt officers were being reviewed to determine whether convictions had been obtained through falsified evidence or perjured testimony. Defense attorneys across Illinois began filing appeals for clients who had been convicted based on evidence or testimony provided by the arrested officers. The corruption scandal threatened to undermine decades of criminal prosecutions and potentially result in the release of legitimately guilty defendants. Local government officials found themselves facing difficult questions about oversight and accountability systems that had failed to detect 25 years of criminal activity within their police departments. Mayor Sandra Williams of Richmond announced the formation of a citizen oversight committee to review police department procedures and restore community trust. The Torres case has revealed systematic failures in our institutions that allowed criminal behavior to continue undetected for a quarter century, Mayor Williams announced during a packed city council meeting. "We owe it to Michael and Rebecca Torres' memory and to our community's future to ensure that nothing like this can ever happen again." The arrests generated national media attention that transformed the Torres case into a symbol of police corruption and institutional failure. News networks featured extensive coverage of how a drug trafficking organization had successfully purchased protection from multiple law enforcement agencies while operating with virtual impunity. As federal prosecutors prepared their case for what promised to be one of the most significant police corruption trials in American history, they realized that the Torres investigation had exposed problems that extended far beyond the specific crimes committed in Illinois. The case had revealed how criminal organizations could systematically corrupt law enforcement agencies, creating networks of protection that allowed illegal activities to continue for decades while eliminating anyone who threatened to expose their operations. But the most troubling revelation was yet to come. As federal investigators continued analyzing evidence seized during the arrests, they discovered indications that the Torres murders were not an isolated incident, and that other people who had threatened the drug trafficking operation had also been eliminated in ways that had never been connected to the criminal conspiracy. The question that would haunt prosecutors as they prepared for trial was whether they had uncovered the full extent of the conspiracy, or whether additional victims and crimes remained hidden in the shadows of a criminal network that had operated successfully for over a quarter century. The federal courthouse in Chicago had been transformed into a fortress of justice, with security measures befitting the prosecution of one of Illinois' most extensive criminal conspiracies. U.S. Attorney Patricia Williams stood in the war room that had been established on the building's secured fifth floor, surrounded by evidence that represented 25 years of suppressed truth about murder, corruption, and institutional betrayal. The evidence compilation process had required 6 full-time paralegal specialists working under the supervision of Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen to organize decades of materials that had been systematically hidden, destroyed, or falsified by the very law enforcement agencies responsible for investigating the Torres case. 27 boxes of documents lined the walls of the prosecution's command center, each containing meticulously catalogued evidence that would be presented to jurors who would have to understand how a criminal conspiracy had successfully operated within police departments and government agencies for over a quarter century. We are essentially prosecuting 2 cases simultaneously, U.S. Attorney Williams explained to her prosecution team during a July planning session. The 1993 murders of Michael and Rebecca Torres and the 25-year conspiracy to cover up those murders while continuing to operate a multi-million-dollar drug trafficking network. The evidence compilation revealed the staggering scope of institutional corruption that had been necessary to hide the Torres murders. Financial records showed over $5 million in payments to law enforcement personnel between 1990 and 2000, with corrupt officers receiving compensation through shell companies, fake consulting contracts, and manipulated overtime payments. Document analysis had identified 47 separate instances of evidence tampering, witness intimidation, or report falsification connected to the Torres case. Each incident represented a federal crime, creating a prosecution strategy that would demonstrate systematic criminal activity rather than isolated misconduct. The forensic evidence recovered from the abandoned well where the Torres couple had been buried provided prosecutors with physical proof that would be impossible for defense attorneys to explain away. DNA evidence, ballistics analysis, and forensic anthropology created an overwhelming scientific case against the defendants. Witness preparation represented the most challenging aspect of the prosecution strategy, as many of the people who could testify about the Torres murders and subsequent cover-up had been living in fear for 25 years. Federal marshals had relocated 12 key witnesses to secure facilities across the United States, providing them with new identities and comprehensive protection from retaliation. Linda Walsh, the former rest stop supervisor who had witnessed the Torres abduction, was relocated to a secure facility in Oregon, where federal psychologists worked with her to overcome decades of trauma and prepare her for the emotional challenge of testifying about events she had been forced to suppress for 25 years. Mrs. Walsh has been suffering from severe PTSD related to witnessing the Torres abduction and the subsequent intimidation she experienced, explained Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the federal psychologist assigned to work with prosecution witnesses. Our goal is to help her process her trauma while preparing her to provide clear, accurate testimony about what she observed. James Peterson, the rest stop maintenance worker who had photographed the abduction, required similar psychological support to overcome the guilt and fear that had consumed him since 1993. Peterson's testimony would be crucial for establishing the timeline and circumstances of the Torres murders. Captain Robert Wilson, the charter company pilot who had witnessed the executions at the abandoned farm, was placed in the most secure witness protection facility due to the likelihood that criminal associates might attempt to silence him before trial. Wilson's eyewitness testimony would provide jurors with a first-hand account of how Michael and Rebecca Torres had been murdered. The media attention surrounding the Torres case had grown from local interest to national obsession, as details of the police corruption scandal emerged through court filings and press conferences. CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC provided daily coverage of developments in what journalists were calling the biggest police corruption case in American history. The case attracted particular attention from investigative journalists and true crime enthusiasts who recognized the Torres prosecution as a watershed moment in exposing how criminal organizations could systematically corrupt law enforcement agencies. The story resonated with audiences who were already skeptical about police accountability and institutional integrity. 60 Minutes devoted 2 full episodes to the Torres case, featuring interviews with family members, federal investigators, and experts in police corruption. The CBS program's coverage reached over 15 million viewers and generated hundreds of tips from people across the United States who believed they had information about similar cases of police misconduct. The Discovery Channel announced plans for a documentary series about the Torres investigation, while Netflix acquired rights to produce a dramatic mini-series based on the case. The media attention ensured that the trial would be conducted under intense public scrutiny, with every aspect of the proceedings broadcast live on multiple networks. For the Torres and Castellanos families, the approaching trial represented both the culmination of 25 years of seeking justice and the beginning of a painful process of reliving the trauma of losing Michael and Rebecca. Carlos Torres, now 60 years old, had devoted half his life to keeping his brother's case alive, despite institutional indifference and official cover-ups. This trial is not just about getting justice for Michael and Rebecca, Carlos explained during a pre-trial interview with federal prosecutors. It's about proving that ordinary citizens can fight institutional corruption and win, even when the system seems designed to protect criminals in positions of power. Maria Castellanos, Rebecca's mother, had lived every day since 1993, wondering whether her daughter had suffered before she died. The forensic evidence suggesting that Michael and Rebecca had been executed quickly provided some comfort, but the knowledge that they had been murdered by police officers added a layer of betrayal that was difficult to process. "We trusted these people to protect our children," Maria said during a family meeting with prosecutors. "Learning that police officers killed Michael and Rebecca feels like a violation of everything we believed about law and order in our community." The defense strategy employed by attorneys representing the 4 defendants focused on claims that their clients had been following orders from higher-level figures in the drug trafficking organization who had never been identified or prosecuted. Defense attorneys argued that the arrested men were scapegoats, being blamed for crimes ordered by more powerful criminals. Defense attorney David Brennan, representing former Detective William Patterson, argued that his client had been coerced into participating in the Torres murders by threats against his family. According to Brennan's pre-trial motions, Patterson had been told that refusing to participate in the killings would result in his wife and children being targeted for elimination. "My client was trapped between impossible choices," Brennan argued during pre-trial hearings. "He could participate in murders he didn't want to commit, or watch his own family be killed by the same criminal organization. Detective Patterson chose to protect his family, and he has lived with the guilt of that decision for 25 years. The defense strategy for Sergeant Michael Thompson focused on claims that Illinois state police officials had ordered him to eliminate the Torres couple as part of a federal investigation into drug trafficking that required protecting ongoing undercover operations. Thompson's attorney argued that his client believed he was following legitimate law enforcement orders. Frank Morrison's defense team claimed that the charter company owner had been blackmailed into cooperation by corrupt police officers who threatened to falsely prosecute him for drug trafficking unless he allowed his aircraft to be used for illegal cargo transportation. Morrison's attorneys argued that their client was a victim of police extortion rather than a willing participant in criminal conspiracy. Captain James Sullivan's defense focused on claims that orders to suppress the Torres investigation had originated from federal agencies that were conducting classified operations requiring the protection of criminal informants within drug trafficking organizations. Sullivan's attorneys argued that their client had been following legitimate orders from superior officers who were cooperating with federal investigations. The defense strategies created a complex legal challenge for federal prosecutors who had to prove not only that the defendants had committed the crimes charged, but that they had done so willingly rather than under coercion from unnamed higher-level criminals or federal agencies. U.S. Attorney Williams recognized that the defense claims, while potentially false, would resonate with jurors who might find it difficult to believe that respected law enforcement officers would commit murder for financial gain. The prosecution would need to present overwhelming evidence of voluntary criminal participation rather than coerced cooperation. The defense wants jurors to believe that 4 law enforcement officers accidentally found themselves involved in a murder conspiracy, Williams explained to her prosecution team. Our job is to show that these men made deliberate choices to participate in criminal activities in exchange for substantial financial rewards. The trial preparation revealed that the Torres case would require jurors to understand complex financial transactions, forensic evidence, witness testimony, and legal principles spanning multiple areas of federal law. Jury selection would be crucial for finding citizens capable of processing the enormous amount of evidence while remaining objective about allegations of police misconduct. As August approached and the trial date neared, federal prosecutors faced the challenge of presenting a case that had taken 25 years to uncover, in a format that jurors could understand and accept. The complexity of the evidence threatened to overwhelm citizens who would be asked to render judgment on one of the most significant police corruption cases in American history. The question that haunted prosecutors as they completed their trial preparation was whether a jury of ordinary citizens would have the courage to convict law enforcement officers of murder and conspiracy, or whether institutional respect for police authority would create reasonable doubt about crimes that had been meticulously documented through federal investigation. But the most troubling revelation came during final witness preparation, when Captain Wilson provided additional information that suggested the Torres murders were part of a larger elimination program targeting people who threatened the drug trafficking network. Wilson's testimony would reveal that other victims had been killed to protect the conspiracy, and that some of those cases had never been connected to the criminal organization. The trial that was about to begin in Chicago would determine not only the fate of 4 men accused of murder and conspiracy, but whether the American justice system could hold law enforcement officers accountable for crimes committed under the protection of badges and the assumption of public trust. August 15, 2018. The Everett McKinley Dirksen United States Courthouse in Chicago buzzed with an electric tension that had not been felt since the city's most notorious organized crime trials of the 1990s. By 7 a.m., 3 hours before proceedings were scheduled to begin, a line of potential spectators stretched around the block, hoping to witness what legal experts were calling the most significant police corruption trial in American history. Inside courtroom 2525 on the building's 25th floor, U.S. District Judge Patricia Morrison presided over a scene that resembled a military operation more than a typical criminal trial. Federal marshals had implemented unprecedented security measures with metal detectors, bomb-sniffing dogs, and armed guards positioned throughout the courthouse to protect witnesses who had risked their lives to testify against corrupt law enforcement officers. The courtroom's gallery was packed with a carefully vetted audience that included Torres and Castellanos' family members, representatives from major media outlets, law enforcement officials from agencies across the Midwest, and legal scholars who recognized the trial's potential impact on police accountability nationwide. Carlos Torres sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, his weathered hands gripping a folder containing 25 years of evidence he had compiled independently while waiting for official justice. Beside him, Maria Castellanos clutched a rosary and a photograph of Rebecca, taken just weeks before her murder, her eyes fixed on the defendants who would soon learn whether American justice could hold law enforcement officers accountable for the ultimate betrayal of public trust.